Hey guys, welcome to a special episode of Stand Up with a very special guest, Peter Coyote, giving Pete Co, John Carroll's song, and the news arrest, and playing listener Mark Nolte's song written about today's guest, Peter Coyote, called Coyote. Here comes Mark Nolte on lead vocals, and what a voice he's got. Love it. Sing it, Mark. So this is a song about today's guest, Peter Coyote. I'll play it in its entirety, sorry for talking over it, at the end of our conversation. Hopefully you know Peter from his appearances on this show, if you didn't already know him before, but I'm very proud to say I met him through hosting a national radio show at Sirius XM. One of the great perks and benefits was you never knew who was listening, from Bob Odenkirk to Peter Coyote to so many more amazing, influential people that I got to know through the show. Peter used to actually call the show, and one of my producers recognized his voice and said, wait, is this Peter Coyote? And he just said, yes, it is. Pete and I became pen pals, writing each other emails, and then he started coming on the show as a guest, like, several times back in the day, and of course, we became friends, and so he supported me through my transition out of corporate media and to this independent media adventure, and he's become kind of an important part of our community, a teacher, an elder, and we love him for all of his flaws, which he would admit there are many. He has become one of the most influential, thoughtful, thought-provoking, funny, generous, kind, and righteous people I know. He's an award-winning actor, author, director, screenwriter, a narrator who you probably know from the work he's done with Ken Burns in his PBS series, where he's won a whole bunch of awards, including Emmys. 8 Ken Burns documentaries, most recently the one about the Holocaust. Just recently premiered on PBS, The U.S. and the Holocaust. Talked to him about that in today's show. We talked about meditation. We talked about politics. We talked about ego and men. And he is raw and righteous and honest as always. I learned so much from him. Thank you very much to Mark Nolte and City Park for this song, and I played it for him, but if you want to see and hear his reaction, I'll play that recording at tonight's Hangout, because it's the Thursday night Hangout. If you're a Stand Up with Pete Almodovar community member, paid subscriber, you'll get a link to join us, and I will share that video with subscribers, and then maybe at some point with everybody else. But hang out with us tonight. It's always a great time, and I'll play the video and share it with everybody. Mark Nolte will be there. I've asked him. He said he'll join us. That's him singing there in the background. Ladies and gentlemen, get all of his books, read everything he's written, and write a song about him, and maybe I can play it for him, which is exactly what I did. What an honor, a privilege, and what luck I have. And this is the value of the show, that I can get these people, these great folks on. So thank you very much for listening and subscribing. Here's my latest, very important and moving conversation, at least to me, with Peter Coyote, who is now 80 years old and sharp as always. Yes, I have him back by popular demand. There he is, ladies and gentlemen, the legend, Peter Coyote. Thank you, sir, so much for joining me again.
It's nice to be here, Pete.
Lots to talk with you about, of course. I am very excited to share this song that a listener wrote for you. What is the most you get uncomfortable with this kind of flattery? How do you feel when people just love to talk to you, love to meet you, love to connect with you? What does it make you feel?
You know, if I answer that seriously, it makes me feel uncomfortable because you don't know the degree of projection that they have. In other words, I once complained to my Buddhist teacher. I said, wow, I'm having trouble being a teacher here. You know, people are either too differential or they're too critical or they're picking fights with me or what is it? And he told me something that taught me something. He said, you know, you've worked really hard to be an ordinary person. You've worked really hard not to shed the accoutrements of fame and narcissism and all that stuff. He said, but you're not yet taking responsibility for people's projections of who you are. And if you're going to be a priest, you have to do that. So when people come and they see a movie star, or they see a celebrity, or they see a famous guy, they either want to knock you down to their own level, or they want to, worship, they want to something. It's very rare that people come straight in and stay on the one and don't deflect. So when I'm sort of the target of lots of fulsome praise, I'm reminded of the fact that nature itself is half positive and half negative, and human nature is exactly the same way. And for people who are not looking at my shadow sides, I can't pretend that I don't have them. And so to sit there and listen to, oh my God, oh my Peter Coyote, it's like I know they're only seeing, they're projecting stuff they like, and they're not accepting the fullness of my own human nature or their own. And that's a very dangerous thing. And so it makes me uncomfortable on both levels.
Yeah, I don't share that discomfort. Praise me, please. Let's go.
Well, you're wonderful, and you have a great show, and you have a fantastic choice of guests.
Well, I think I also have work to do if I'm actually feeling that way. So, I mean, I've learned so much about ego over the past few years, especially whether it be, talking about kind of celebrity and notoriety with your work, being a public person, or ego with your spouse or with your kids. It's always at play. And I wonder if you think there's a difference when it comes to ego with regards to gender at all. I mean, it does. I talk a lot to men about this these days and try to address it and how they're dealing with it. Do you think there's a different relationship with ego with men or women, or is it the same?
No, well, first of all, I think, it's safe to say that most men like pussy, but I don't believe most men like women actually like them and actually see that their intelligence is much more complicated and fulsome and dynamic than our own. And so, yes, women have ego problems, men have ego problems, but the ego itself is not a problem, or it wouldn't have survived evolution. The problem is our attachment to it and failing some techniques that allow us to distance ourselves and see it more objectively. I mean, the ego's job is to make you cross on the green, to make you brush your teeth, to not take stuff that's going to kill you, and keep this sack of flesh alive. And we turn it into a warden. By being told who we are through our life, by implying who we are, by the way people respond to us, by projecting the way we want to be, we turn this awareness, which is not an organ, which has no physical presence, we turn it into a reified object like a thing. And then we can start to say things like, oh, I can't do this, or, oh, I know myself, like you're a finished process. And it's that dynamic that meditation is particularly good at disentangling you from.
Well, let's get into that then, because as folks who listen to the show or people in my life know, I've gone through a real transformation over the last year. And it's interesting because I've been talking to you and others about this for years, about Buddhism and about meditation. I've read about it. I've tried it. And I've always been into self-help and enlightenment and certainly into therapy. But you have a really interesting passage about this and a lot to say about the combination or the difference between therapy and meditation in your book, The Lone Ranger and Tonto Meet Buddha, Masks, Meditation, and Improvised Play to Induce Liberated States, which we've talked about before, but I still could talk about at length. But specifically, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on that, because, of course, you see the utility of therapy. But the reason I ask it because, like I said, I've done all the other things, but I finally started. I'm really proud. And I think about you probably almost every day because I now am meditating every day. But I think about you and I go, Coyote and a couple of others were right. It works. It is working for me. And I've made it my own. I have a long way to go, but it really is the thing. The meditation is the thing that has transformed me over the past, really 2 months that have helped me. Tell me about that difference, the utility between therapy and why meditation matters so much.
Okay. First of all, let me say that I'll text you my YouTube channel. And I think the very first Dharma talk I recorded is called You Think You Can't Meditate, But You Can.
Great.
And it's a real how-to about Zen meditation that will help you. So here's how it goes. I just said that we all have self-awareness. But self-awareness, just because there's a word for the self, doesn't mean the self exists in the way we think it does. I mean, we have this body, we have sight, we have all these senses, taste, smell, touch, all of that. But the thing we refer to as a self is actually an awareness. Each of our organs have awareness. Eyes have awareness. Ears have awareness. And the self is what organizes all of them. Tells us when something's going on out over here or behind us or what our intuitions are doing. But we think of it having a physical self like an organ, and it doesn't. And that's the good news. Because the good news is that there's nothing about you that's not mediable, that's not either habit or constant practice. If there's something about yourself you don't like and you're serious about getting to the bottom of it, meditation will reveal it to you and will show you a path to basically conquer a bad habit. So the difference between meditation and therapy is therapy posits an ego. It posits it like an entity. And we can think of neurosis as being caught in a loop that is at odds with reality. And what a good therapist does is he helps you see things objectively, or she sees things objectively. And if you're working with a good therapist, after a while, you'll start to say, oh, I wonder what Dr. Smith would say about that. And so there you have a perch outside your neurotic loop. You have a place to sit and observe yourself. Well, in meditation, we're paying attention to our posture. We're paying attention to our breathing. I don't know if you sit with this mudra, but we're paying attention to that mudra. And that awareness is sequestered. And that's your little perch from which you can observe the brain, your thoughts, your impulses, your sensation, and consciousness. So the limit to therapy is that it can become a black hole. Since the self doesn't exist as a physical entity, we can get lost in polishing, understanding it, trying to get to the bottom of stuff, and forget that we still have to change. No matter what trauma we went through, no matter what our history was, if we're at odds with reality, if our daily practice is not resonant with the way the world and the universe actually work, we're in trouble. So certain cultures, like Japanese culture, for instance, the culture is so strict that it polishes the ego. There are so many things that people have to do and they're expected to do that you have to kind of get smoothed out by it. In America, where freedom is our mantra, there's nothing to stop us from being a sociopath. I mean, it's pretty easy to get off the track pursuing this idea of getting as much power, wealth, status, skill for yourself as you possibly can. So I was in therapy for a long time while I was meditating. It certainly helped me get over being a heroin addict. It certainly helped me, get over some residual rages that were, driving me nuts. But really, for me, the real deepest teacher was meditation, where yourself actually dissolves and softens and becomes permeable like a colander. And then the vastness that it floats in gets to send messages through to you.
I have been reading Pema Chodron. Are you familiar with her?
Yeah, she's wonderful.
And I guess she's a Buddhist nun.
Yeah.
And she has like mantras or intentions that she sets. And I've heard this with a lot of other meditation as well. That's really what has been working for me, because I can understand the root of what's causing me stress, anxiety, reactions, desires, impulsivity, all the problems that I have. I can understand that I have those problems. To some extent, therapy's helped me understand the root of them. And I sometimes can repair them, but not consistently enough. So when I meditate, I set an intention and I actually say things like, may I not be an asshole today? May I find the space between stimulus and reaction and wait just that sweet, sweet moment to not react. May I think about? May I be silent? May I not dominate a conversation? Like things like that. They're kind of concrete intentions, mantras, if you will, that help me remind me of what I want to do today. Is that okay? What do you think about that? It's really working for me. And in between that, I just clear my mind and listen to my breath and do all the more traditional things, some of which you said. What do you think?
So in Zen practice, we say, put no head above your own. It sounds like your head's telling you what to do. I would never disagree with a teacher like Pema Chodron. She's a very deep, gifted teacher. Our Zen practice is a little different. We don't use mantras so much. We don't use guided meditation. We throw people in the deep water. It's the closest practice in a Tibetan tradition would be Dzogchen. And the Tibetans get you ready for it by giving you lots of exercises and visualizations and things to do. It's just the difference between two techniques and two schools of thought. So I'm only qualified to speak about Zen. And my feeling is that everything will bubble up, that when you sit still and you remove distractions and you sit in your actual life, paying attention to your body and your breath, your ego will relax a little or become semi-permeable. And we feel that when the fruit's ripe, it will drop. Enlightenment will fall when you're ready. In the meantime, the Buddha left us these kind of maps called the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, which are themselves enlightened practices of living a life. And they're shared by all Buddhists. Not all Buddhists shave their heads, not all marry, not all are celibate, not all meditate. There's this vastness of diversity in Buddhism. But I think all accept the Four Noble Truths and the precepts and the Eightfold Paths. So anyone who's teaching that is kind of, kin to me.
Can you try different forms of meditation? I've already seemingly tried, I got trained, I got pulled in by the folks at the TM, David Lynch's operation when I was a media person, because their whole idea is to sell it. And so they get well-known people like me at the time to go out there. I don't think it's a bad thing. It certainly helped me at the time, but I'm not really practicing that kind anymore. And now you're describing, obviously, Zen practice. Can we mix and match?
You can, but at a certain point, I think if you want depth, you have to take a stand. Otherwise, you're like a water strider. I mean, we all know people who are doing Jung this week and meditation next week and going to Latin America to take ayahuasca, and then they're going to Thailand to sit in the Buddhist monastery. And, it makes a well-rounded half-inch in diameter person. What we want is depth. And so I would say if you have a form that's working and you're under the influence of Pema Chodron, you should submit to that and go as deeply as you can. I will tell you a funny story, though.
I may be misrepresenting Pema Chodron. I'm just saying my interpretation of at least one of her books and how I'm using it. But go ahead with your story.
Well, she has a website. You can go online. You can look up various subjects. Yep. You can find disciples of hers and check your understanding out. But so one of my longest standing addictions is my 52 Dodge Power Wagon truck, which was built by friends of mine in Fairfield, Iowa. And they've got 3 acres of these great old military-style civilian trucks. And when I was out there working on my truck, I went with my friend for coffee at this little coffee shop in Fairfield. And I said, wow, this is a great cup of coffee. I'd gone to school in Iowa for 4 years. There's no such thing as a cappuccino in Iowa. And some people sat down with us. And I said, wow, afterwards, I said, these are really interesting people. It's not often that I meet people that are just like on the one. So the next day, the same thing happened. A different 3 people sat down. And the third day, I finally said to my friend, hey, man, color me stupid or something, but what's going on here? There's this great cup of coffee. I've met 9 or 10 really sterling people. He said, oh, you don't know. He said, well, Fairfield, Iowa is where the Maharishi bought Parsons College, and he created a meditation university, and we all went there, and then we became faculty there, and then we got tired of the organizational bullshit and we left, but we still practice and we live our lives here. And it really taught me a lesson, because I would have spoken disparagingly of the Maharishi 30 years ago. But I realize it's the practice and not the flag you fly it under. It's the meditation itself. And so I wouldn't worry. I would just be consistent and do it every day. And it's a cumulative practice. It's not an immediate practice. You have to do it when you're bored. You have to do it when you're not feeling well. You have to do it when you're restless.
Hard to do when you're restless. Hard to do when there's something terrible happening.
Yeah. It's hard to sit with that, and that's why the bars are full.
Well, you mentioned, you've talked all about your own drug use addiction throughout your life, throughout your books. Those stories are fascinating stories. You're friends with Michael Pollan, who I've interviewed several times, and his work, and you mentioned ayahuasca. You have this way of talking about it, like, what is this, the Grand Canyon metaphor in terms of pursuit of altering our state of mind using drugs and alcohol. What's the difference between that and meditating?
Well, alcohol is a poison. Just first and foremost, it's a poison. It releases toxins in your body. I don't care if you drink 1 glass of wine a day, you're poisoning yourself more gradually. I have nothing against psychedelics at all, but they can be misleading. And so the metaphor that you grabbed was me saying, taking psychedelics is like taking a helicopter to the Grand Canyon. Yeah. The vista is awesome. It rearranges your perceptions for a while. It's quite helpful. However, you got there in a helicopter. You don't know how to get back without the helicopter. Right. If you had walked there, you could have left a breadcrumb trail to get yourself back. Meditating is walking there. And I will tell you in absolute confidence that no single experience without a daily practice will ever resist the force of your habits. Your habits will reassert themselves. They will recome. So there's a kind of delusion that accompanies the power of psychedelic experiences, that unless you have a practice to develop a center of gravity and to deal with your negative and positive characteristics in a balanced way and see them and realize the insubstantiality of both and learn how not to run toward what you love and run away from what you don't like, nothing's going to help you. It's just entertainment.
Do you still use drugs and alcohol?
I don't drink at all. And I don't use drugs at all, but I don't have a prohibition against it. I mean, I used to love opium, but my Iranian friends in Paris couldn't get visas to America anymore.
So my fantasy is still out there, that I come in, I spend a week just hanging out with you to become your disciple, to learn how to, teach masking, and we smoke a little weed. That's not going to happen.
I'm not going to smoke weed. I don't enjoy it. First of all, I never liked weed. It made me paranoid and stupid. I used to smoke hashish, and I liked that. I did a lot of work. I stayed clear on hashish, but
you say you never smoke weed, but I mean, I recall the story which you write about where you tried to smuggle like 9 kilos when you were 17 and were arrested.
8 kilos. I didn't say I never smoked weed. I said I don't enjoy it, so I don't do it. And to me, I have a larger question, which is why everybody wants to stay stoned.
Right.
I don't want to be stoned. I'm really a happy person, and my life is really interesting, and I want to experience all its weather. I don't want to stupefy any kind of thing that's going to come through my nervous system. I want the full deal, the full Monty.
I love that.
So it's not, I'm not a prohibitionist at all, but it is a question to be asked, as the marijuana industry blooms and people are lining up to get a safer alternative to alcohol. Why do you want to change? Why do you want to change your actual inner nature, which is the inner nature of the universe, because the thing you call I was Buddha's I. And the thing Buddha called I was the nature of the universe itself. And that's what's blowing through us. That's what's coming over our spinal telephone. Imagine the back of your head is off and the rest of the universe is pouring in. Why would you want to shape that only to your liking? Because your little prejudices of your ego, which only has 3 options: like, dislike, and neutral. Wow, what a vast existence.
That reminds me, I have to read a commercial for a new cannabis product, Peter.
Go ahead.
I'm kidding. I know you would say, like, go ahead. I was joking. They don't have any sponsors other than a job hiring site. Okay. So speaking of which, though, reading commercials, everybody knows your voiceover work. And I do have to ask you, because I think it just came out this week, the new Ken Burns documentary about the Holocaust, which you were involved with, as well as a lot of other celebrity voices, apparently. I haven't seen it. But what do you want to tell me about this experience? And did you learn anything?
Well, I learned a lot. Not due to that, but it was only 2 months ago that I learned that my grandmother's sister and husband and children were shot in Poland. I mean, that's when we actually learned their fate. So I'd spent much of my youth researching the Holocaust because I was driven crazy by the fact that I couldn't believe that the Jews didn't fight back. And in fact, they did fight back. What's interesting about this Ken Burns series was America's relation to the Holocaust. And one of the things I learned was the same Fox News, fascist, authoritarian news broadcasting was going on then. When the Jews were trying to flee from Europe, those voices were saying, oh, we can't let them in. Russian spies will sneak in with them. When there was a huge strain of anti-Semitism, Father Coughlin, a virulent priest, guys in the State Department who actually subverted Franklin Roosevelt's plan to get visas for the Jews. But the most telling fact to me was after the war, the first thing Eisenhower did when he liberated the camps was grab the German villagers and bring them in and make them bury the bodies, just so there was no chance that they didn't know what had happened. Then the next thing he did was he ran the soldiers through, American soldiers, to say, this is what you've been fighting for. And then the third thing he did was he ran the press through, the American press. And the piece of the story that sticks in my craw particularly is that even after the news was all over America, only 5% of Americans voted to raise the visas for Jews. You have to remember that I grew up in the 40s. And in the 40s and up through the late 50s, Jews were not white people. I lived a block from the country club. My family couldn't join. I'd be playing with my friends. They'd say, wow, let's go swimming. I'd say, oh, wait, I can't go with you. Well, we'll see you tomorrow. There were schools you couldn't go to. There were all sorts of edicts. And so it accounts for one of the relationships between the Jews and black people, which historically has been very intimate. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing was, this is the first time I've been able to introduce something to Ken that he didn't know about because his research is so amazing and impeccable. He had never heard of the Ringelblum archives, which are in this series now because a friend of my family's was one of the translators of the Ringelblum archives. And what they were was when the people in the Warsaw Ghetto understood that the Nazi purpose was actually annihilation, extermination of the Jews, they called rabbis together, all that they could find, and they wrote down every aspect of Jewish life and culture, and they buried it in hermetically sealed steel milk cans in the Warsaw Ghetto, and they sent out maps to 5 nations on earth. And Yuri Sul was a Hebrew poet and a journalist, and he was one of the people called on to translate it. And Ken had never heard of that. And they Googled it. They saw photographs of the milk cans and stuff like that. And they put it in the show right in front of me. It was thrilling.
Oh, that's awesome. What's your relationship like with him? I've heard you talk about it, but I've heard you say you guys bust each other's chops. Like, you're that close?
Yeah, no, I can't speak for him, for me. He teases me. He calls me Roshi all the time, or, but we get along really well. I mean, I'm far to the left of his politics, but he is so thorough and so careful in everything he does. He's very funny. And I think we've done 12 things together that we have certain standing jokes between us that, it's just a joy for me. Every time I get something new, I learn. It's like getting a master's course in the subject, and I get to play with Ken and Sarah Botstein and Lynn Novick. They're just the greatest people to work with.
Any of them worth sharing, or is it private? The jokes. Any of those things, those jokes between you?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example. Yeah. So, my background is Jewish, so I have a different internal sense of music than Ken Burns does. So, for instance, if I'm reading a script and I'm doing a list and I say, there was a pen, a computer, a notebook, a book, and a telephone, that will drive him nuts. And he'll say, you went up at the end of each word. You went up. And I'll say, oh, yeah, okay. So what he wants to hear is there's a pen, a computer screen, a notebook, a book, a telephone, because he hears that rising note as a kind of manipulation. And so I'll read 2 pages of single-spaced text, and he'll say, line 15, you went up on but. And I'll say, there's a window behind you, Ken. Why don't you jump out of it? But he's always right. He catches me. And that's not so much because there are always fleeting moments that are just based on camaraderie and mutual respect. Yeah.
I love that when that quality exists between two people, creative people especially. Speaking of the Holocaust and Nazis, what do you make of the modern day comparisons with what we're seeing, not only in America, this streak of authoritarianism, autocracy, fascism, I think is probably the best word, although it's not the same. It's not the same as Mussolini wasn't, and it's not the same as obviously what happened in Germany in the 30s. John Meacham is talking about comparing it to America, I think, in the 1850s and 60s. What do you make of these comparisons to history or what's happening in America and kind of around the world in places like Hungary, obviously Russia, Brazil, and other countries?
Yeah. Well, it's not like those places yet.
Right.
So there have always been authoritative forces in America. The American Constitution is not the best picture of a democracy. When it started, only white men who owned property could vote. The Electoral College is an extremely anti-democratic institution. The fact that the state of Montana, with 500,000 people, gets the same representation in the Senate as California with 23 million people is an anti-democratic fact. So we've struggled with those things for our history. The problem is that the Supreme Court and its infinite compliance with the forces of capital created the Citizens United movement, which completely skewed the game to big money. It allowed big money to remain invisible.
Yeah.
And we have to accept that we have an electoral system that's organized around money. And since money is its organizing principle, the needs and desires of money always trump the needs of the citizens. And so we have basically the Congress is a wholly owned subsidiary of big capital. We have basically legalized prostitution, where lobbyists can give gifts, emoluments, junkets, tickets, speaking tours, future employment to the people who are designated to look after our rights and needs. And our electoral system has been reduced to candidates holding focus groups to find out the buzzwords that will get them our vote to go to Washington. Then they go to Washington, they begin their real labor, which is the repaying of their donors. which takes about 5 hours of the public time every single day, fundraising.
Yeah.
Every single day. And there is not a Democrat who will refuse $100,000 from the Koch brothers or Richard Scaife Mellon or any of the people while they're asking for our $7 and $6 in innumerable tin cup wavings on my emails. So until we could fix it in 3 steps, but no one will.
Well, I think that you're mostly right. There's some Democrats have taken, like, I think Bernie Sanders has not taken that big money. And I think
Bernie Sanders, I'm being a little hyperbolic.
Yeah, I want to push back on your generalization about all Democrats. But have you, by the way, been getting emails and texts from other celebrities? And because you're a celebrity yourself, you think it's actually them? Like Julia Louis-Dreyfus emails me every day. I'm like, oh, she must know me. Oh, no, it's just a fundraising.
No, but let me say something else.
Yeah.
So from 1973 until right now, wages have been frozen in the United States.
Yeah.
The buying power, of the minimum wage in 1973 was actually greater than the $7.15 it is today.
Yeah.
So for 30 years, Republicans and Democrats have sat on their hands and allowed inflation to wipe out the buying power of the American working public by over 25%. They know that. They know this is a huge gift to the corporate sector. The people who don't know it are the people who are shitting in the Capitol. And people are not shitting in the Capitol because they love Donald Trump. They're shitting in the Capitol because since Lewis Powell's white paper, where he wrote a blueprint explaining how the corporate sector could seize power, which they have followed for 50 years in lockstep. And since Reagan's inauguration, where he fired 11,000 striking union workers, declared war on the unions, weakened the National Labor Relations Board, opened up right-to-work states, and wrecked the fabric of the wealth-producing mechanism of the middle class, both parties have been colluding in ignoring blue-collar, rural, and urban people. And I can go down in lockstep, but I will just 3 steps. Nixon's Secretary of Agriculture tells farmers, get bigger, get out. Talks them into taking big loans for heavy equipment. Tells them they'll be safe because their land values are rising. Jimmy Carter's Fed chair raises interest rates 5 points in a single day to signal fighting inflation, wipes out hundreds of thousands of American farmers, turns the Midwest into a dead zone. GATT and NAFTA ship their industrial jobs out, and America applies less retraining money than any other industrial country. Newt Gingrich declares the Democrats as evil. Bill Clinton creates the Financial Modernization Act, which ends Glass-Steagall, the law in place since the Depression, which stopped banks and insurance from gambling with your money. And he made it illegal to regulate credit default swaps, which was the kind of backstop insurance program for the liar's loans. So in 2008, when 6 million people a month were having their shit put out on the street in front of their neighbors and evicted, Robert Rubin was not called to task. Jamie Dimon was not called to task. Not a single C-suite executive went to jail. So these people in the Midwest who were given the opioids pandemic and the crystal meth pandemic, they've been watching the same chipper, cheerful newscasters with good hair and good suits chatting Kathy Chatty every day. And they figured out that this system is working against them. And they took a Hail Mary pass on a grifter, an orange Jesus from New York. And it never occurred to them, because he was campaigning on Bernie Sanders' rhetoric, that he would lie, that he would steal them blind. And so these people have been reduced to insanity. They're now just gibbering over conspiracy theories because they don't even know how government works. Civics is not even being taught. So this is a pox on both parties. And of course, there are individuals within them that have honor and that tried their best. But basically, when you have a system based on money, money is going to rule it.
Yeah. I mean, it is absolutely, there's been Democrats, and Clinton signed that deregulation. But it's always been a difference of ideology. I mentioned, I think before I hit record, I talked to Tom Hartman. This is privatization, deregulation, and what is called Reaganism, or now neoliberalism. It was always these are always free market principles that were thought of up by certain, few economists. They were never the principles of progressives or leftists or liberals, really. I think that's fair to say, if I have to split that hair. But more importantly, your dad told you a story like 50 years ago about our economic system. Your dad, who I learned about in The Rain Man's Third Cure, who he was a very flawed guy, but he was also a tycoon, a magnate, a fat cat, Peter. Tell me about what your dad told you, the secret about our economic system so many years ago.
Well, I don't remember which secret, but basically he told me that, the stock market was like throwing darts at a target. And that if you just bought blue chip stocks for an old widow and you left her there for 50 years, which would be the right thing to do, that you couldn't pay your rent. And so there was a manipulation, a grift at the bottom of the stock market, which has now gotten worse because no one can block inside information. It's all over the place. And the real money is being made on inside information and trading. The other thing he told me was that raising interest rates to stop inflation is a scam, because when interest rates go up, money actually gets more profligate. Because if you're making 20% on a loan, you can be a lot less careless about studying the authenticity of the underlying project, right? You're going to lose a few, but you're making so much. If you're making 3 to 5%, you're going to be very judicious. And so the people that pay are the working people. Larry Summers goes on television and says, if we want to stop inflation, we have to raise unemployment way above 5%. Tie that son of a bitch to the Washington Monument and flog him. What he's talking about is firing people, putting families out of work. He's not talking about millionaires paying their taxes.
Yeah.
He's not talking about, equity in the tax system. Yeah. No, fuck the working people. And, do I understand why these people are shitting in the Capitol? Yes, I do.
Epic appearance, ladies and gentlemen, by Peter Coyote. Last question, and then I'm going to hit stop and share with you this song, but written for you. My question is, what have you been doing the last year or two? What is your day like? I know the pandemic, you were doing these Dharma talks when everything shut down. What have you been up to? Where can people find what you're doing and access it?
Okay. So I did Dharma talks from March 2020 to March 2021. And then I transcribed them, and I've been editing them, and I've put them into 2 small books. One about what I call vernacular Buddhism, the kind of non-Japanese Buddhism that I think will explain a lot of stuff to Americans. So you don't mix the exoticism with the teaching. And the other one is a Buddhist perspective on politics called Engaged with Things as It Is. And I've just sold both of those to Inner Traditions. I'm on the final 30 pages of my last edit. So I've been doing that. I've been writing a lot of poems. That's primarily what I've been doing. Walking my dogs, making jam, playing music. I have 8 students that I've been kind of moving through the ranks of Buddhist practice, Zen practice. So I meet with them twice a week, and I'm preparing series of, you could call them promotions. I've ordained 2 priests. I'm going to move one of those to transmission, which means he'll be my equal. He'll be able to ordain his own priests. And then I can kind of retire feeling like I've paid my debt to the Dharma. I really enjoy that kind of teaching. And every once in a while I do a Dharma talk on YouTube, but I'm doing a lot of stuff. Like I do all the Lincoln Project voiceovers. I do them for nothing.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. I met with Rick Wilson and a bunch of people, and I said, I want you to explain to me why I should take $1 from a Democrat and give it to you, who prior to Trump has voted against women, against the environment, against unions, against fair taxes. Why should I do that? And he said, because I'm ashamed of myself and my purpose is to destroy the Republican Party as it currently exists. And I said, okay, apology accepted. So I do theirs. And then I'm supporting this guy, Mike Franken. Mike Franken is an admiral who's running against Grassley in Iowa.
Oh,
the most impressive politician I've ever met outside of Obama, who I've never met. And he's a rural Iowa farm boy raised as a machinist. He has a great sense of precision. He's an admiral, which means he's a bureaucratic master. It means he's a leader of men. And he's got more ideas, creative ideas than I've ever heard in my lifetime. I'm doing a fundraiser for him this Friday. I've done another. I've offered to do all his voiceovers. And, you know, I also offered a lot of people. I offered every black candidate that hit me up for money. I said, I don't have money to give you. I'm on a pension, but I'll do your voiceovers for nothing. I'll do all your ads for nothing. Not a single one responded.
Really?
Not Val Demings, not this black guy in Georgia. I mean, I wrote them all. And so that's something that I do. I do a lot of voiceovers for nothing, you know, good cause documentaries who can't afford me. So it keeps me busy.
Well, I'm going to reach out to some of those candidates that they must not have got your email or not realize who you are, because that's a real miss, I think. All right, I'll let you go. I cannot thank you enough, as always, for joining me, and I really appreciate it, as always, my friend.
Thank you for giving me a chance to vent. You've saved my students.
As always.
There he goes, Peter Coyote, and this is a song by Mark Nolte in City Park. If you want to watch Peter listen to this, join us tonight at the Hangout. Take it away, Mark. So cool.
Teacher shines a simple light. Student escapes their shadow. The way may not be clear. Each path remains open choice. Doors swing on rusted hinge. Mountains have abundant peace. Man's words are rarely true. To fool the shepherd's key. Sits and ponders what's waiting on the other side, while we all move with our eyes down. Oh, there's nothing on the other side. Oh, there's nothing on the other side. Passages from some old book take you through a twisted land.